She's the executive director of the Incremental Development Alliance, and she's also a practicing incremental developer in the Northwest Arkansas region. Monte Anderson is the owner of Options Real Estate and has really been a trailblazer in first-ring suburban neighborhoods in Dallas, Texas. Andrew Ganahl is working within the Kansas City region. He's a principal at And Real Estate and a champion of urban infill housing development and has specifically worked in the Crossroads area as well as the Waldo neighborhood of Kansas City. And then Sean Flandermeyer is the co-owner of Elevate Design Build and a leading home builder in the Kansas City region, focusing on single family and missing middle housing in both urban and suburban markets. So I think we have a really well-rounded panel of participants who have worked on a lot of different types of projects in different markets that I'm really excited about. So without further ado, I would like to just ask each of our panelists to introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your background in incremental development and how that has connected to more suburban markets. Alli, I will start with you.
Okay, thank you guys so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here. One of the things that we have seen kind of significantly is just how much incremental development has changed over the last 10 years. And so I think that's going to be interesting for us to dig into as well. I know that's some of our questions later that I'm excited to dig into. And I think a couple of you guys have heard the story of how I became an incremental developer. So I'll keep this version a little bit brief. But I grew up on a big cattle ranch in Western Oklahoma. 15 square miles of working cow-calf operation. But for the first few years of my life, we lived in a really tiny, walkable small town there where you could walk to run all your errands, and you knew all your neighbors, and everybody took care of them, took care of each other, and you could live your entire life cycle in that community, and there were spaces for each of those stages. And I think that really created a big belief in me of kind of that version of the American dream, which is something a lot of times incremental developers are trying to really add those things back into communities that they, don't have right now. And we just had the holidays. So part of the way that I've been thinking about this too is, I think a lot of us have just gotten in our annual viewing of It's a Wonderful Life, which I think of as like some of the best incremental development propaganda, right? That we've got George Bailey who like devotes his life to taking care of his neighbors, to taking care of his place. And he builds these small, affordable homes in a dignified neighborhood, and he makes sure his neighbors can own their own homes. And they can start their own small productive businesses, and they can raise their families and have a good life. And incremental development to me is about that pattern, but it's also so significantly about picking a place that you love, that will love you back, and then investing your life into that community, raising your kids in that community. And I think a feeling that we get from a lot of our small developers right now nationally is that a lot of people are feeling a little bit run down and a little bit jaded. And I think people are tired. And I think it's not just small developers, right? This business is hard, but the pace of work can be really demanding. And I think sometimes it has been really frustrating for people to still show up at city council meetings with a project that they've like poured their soul into and get yelled at by their neighbors. And so I think that's one of the things that we're really seeing is, the process has evolved. I think people are getting a little bit more selective. They're really leaning into projects that have more of a story. But I think they're also really leaning into that groundwork of neighbors and neighborhoods that is really critical for small developers to be successful, and really leaning back into the relationships that are the things that can get these projects done.
Awesome, Alli. Thank you. And I'll ask Monte Anderson, our other guest from outside the Kansas City region. Can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background in incremental development?
Hi, Abby. My name is Monte Anderson, and I've been doing incremental development for going on nearly 40 years now. I didn't know that's what we called it back then, but I'm in Dallas, Texas. I'm in the southern half of Dallas, which is the have-nots side of the city. And I got into development basically out of desperation because many years ago, I figured that no one was going to be able to come to our cities down here and help us fix ourselves. And so therefore we had to figure out how to do it on our own, and not growing up around money or, the knowledge to do this kind of work. We just kind of, just forced it to happen, just like, found one little piece of land, got my insurance man and my contractor, and we threw a little bit of money together, and we did a little project, and then we did another one and did another one, started off doing little bitty office buildings. And over the time now we're doing 100-acre development incrementally, over a 20-year process, or we may do a big shopping center, that takes us 3 to 4 years to reposition it and put residential on the parking lot. A few years ago, one of the co-founders of the Incremental Development Alliance, and now with Neighborhood Evolution, what we do is we help cities and locals create ecosystems where they can flourish, where cities can create an environment, and you have a group of locals doing the work. Because again, the big developers are really not coming to do it with us; they're coming to do it to us. That's not always the case, but quite often it is the case coming to town, and so that's where I'm at today.
Thanks, Monte. Sean Flandermeyer.
Hi, Sean Flandermeyer here. A little background about our incremental development is I'm business partners with Mike Yanzik, which this is long ago, had started his first incremental development in Blue Springs, Missouri. He worked through many of the incentives. The city was interested in fixing some of their infill lots that didn't have homes on them for quite a while on their main street. It was 19th Street, which is a connecting street. It was a successful project, and not that it was so much about being on the news, but it was newsworthy, and he was motivated by that because I do tie in a little bit of what Alli said. This takes work, and yeah, incremental developers are a passionate group and easily to be weeded out. So Mike was very passionate about it once he got it through, and then that was long ago, but we had started our company in 2017. And we, while I know we're focused on first ring suburbs, we purchased 10 lots in Manheim Park, which in Kansas City is between Troost and Paseo from Brush Creek, around Brush Creek Boulevard, which isn't perceivably 7 years ago now, wasn't maybe the best bet. But we looked at, things that are important, and that is legacy locations. And I can share a little bit more on that later. I think Andrew's also been, which is on this call, has been helpful to us. And then also just, I didn't know what I was doing when we got this stuff back in order. But what I figured out, even though it was before Abby had her sessions through IncDev last year, was that it's really important to focus on the social impact of the community. You have to be good with your financials, and the construction almost not to take it for granted, but comes last. And I think that that's the difference between incremental development and building out in the burbs, which we do both. But the reason why we do it, because I think we like to struggle. I'm not being, derogatory here, but we are passionate about it because we've seen the impact that we've made in Blue Springs. The city has asked us to help there again. At one point, we've seen the impact that we made in Manheim Park, and we have made a connection with community leaders, and we have made a difference, and we have had a good relationship. That's not always the case, but we work hard to try to maintain that with the community, and it feels good. We had a Parade of Homes event one time, and that would be unheard of at one point in the last few years. And many people visited the home and were just passionate about the fact the city needs this. The city needs this. That was constantly repeated when people would visit the homes. And we've built and sold 56 homes within that community, with 11 in production right now. And it's made a significant impact. It's cleaned up the neighborhood a little bit, because I believe some of these empty lots attract homeless people, or they attract things that aren't so friendly to the neighborhood as well. So I guess it turns into something that you didn't know how much you loved it. Now it's like we have so much commitment to it that we're just keep it rolling.
All right, thank you, Sean. And Andrew.
Hey, everybody, this is Andrew Ganahl. I'm with A&D Real Estate. I've been doing infill urban development for about 10 years, primarily apartments, and also some for sale townhomes. The way I came to incremental development is different than the other panelists. So I like how everyone seems to find their own particular path to almost the same place. But I grew up in suburban Southern California, very similar, more of like a third ring kind of suburb. But then once I was out of college, I wanted to live in big cities, right? So I didn't want to be in the car constantly. I wanted to be able to walk places. Lived in San Francisco and then later Washington, D.C., where I worked for the U.S. Department of Treasury for about 10 years as a as an executive and a project manager. But at some point, I was really wanted to do something more tangible, and especially city building. Um, so a partner and I started a small development company, and our first projects were in Kansas City. As you said, in the Crossroads, we did 2 apartment buildings there. And then I've also done some projects in Milwaukee and in the Waldo neighborhood of Kansas City, which I would classify as a first ring suburb or very similar to a first ring suburb. So kind of come at things with more of a public policy background, but also, share the passion for, the built environment. And I mean, there's nothing better than, speaking with your tenants or your buyers, and just seeing the excitement they really love in their homes. And then also coming at things from a little bit more of the entrepreneurial, smaller scale side as well. So definitely eager to get into some of these good questions that you guys have put before us today.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I want to start by taking a little bit of time to define incremental development and how it applies to first ring suburban contexts. Alli, you are the executive director for the Incremental Development Alliance. You work with people all across the country in a lot of different contexts. And you even do a lot of your own projects in Northwest Arkansas, which has both urban and kind of more suburban contexts. Can you talk a little bit about how you would define incremental development and why it's relevant to first ring suburban areas? You're muted.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
And I'll give a little bit too. I think I did go very esoteric on my introduction in incremental development. But generally, yes, I'm a licensed architect and licensed landscape architect in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I have a design practice that has a team of 15. We do a lot full service design, master planning down to picking out faucets for small developers. And then I also am the executive director of IncDev, which is a national nonprofit that's trained about 8,000 small developers and community members since 2015, and has worked in 32 states and 2 Canadian provinces. And so we have a really good national experience on seeing what do we mean when we say this? And we work in a lot of different regions. I sometimes jokingly summarize this as we work up in the Rust Belt where we have too many buildings and not enough people. We work in the fast growing South where we have too many people and not enough buildings. We work in kind of New England where they don't let young people live there, and so they don't have anyone to do anything. Really policy constrained. And on the West Coast where we're even more policy constrained, but also have a pretty traditional suburban pattern as our baseline. A lot of these places really vary. The pattern depends on when they had money and when they built their buildings. But nationally, I think we really could see a consistent agreement that incremental development is 0 to 3 stories. We say 0 because tent markets, pop-ups, kiosks, it counts, it matters, we love it. 3 stories is often that cap because it means no elevators, right? These are woody walk-ups, things that can be built often, wood framed, no elevators. We're going to see fire sprinklers sometimes in some of our more intensive projects. We generally are going to say a cap of 20 units or less, but most of the people are working at even a smaller scale than that. It's mostly residential development because cities themselves are mostly residential. We do see commercial, and it is often impactful, desirable commercial uses that are often locally owned amenities. Incremental development is also about building what your neighborhood needs and building what's missing. So not all first ring suburbs, but a lot of them need more housing choice, more of a range of housing options and housing formats, more price points, more mixed use and locally owned businesses that are walkable or close by. And I think first ring suburbs can present a challenge for people because they can sometimes be a pattern that didn't include as much of the stuff at the beginning, right? So in Fayetteville, we've got our historic core that is in, the small town pattern, right? So we've got a really connected small grid system. We have a lot of alleys, lots of mixed use, lots of small multiplexes, big houses that are actually cut into apartments, little townhouses, little, mixed use buildings. There's lots of that historic pattern. So it's easy to build more of it in the neighborhood because you can point to the kind of thing that you're doing, and we already have some. Our work in first ring suburbs, we have seen being a little bit more challenging because often they are built more consistently of kind of more of one product type. Often if we have commercial, it's in sort of a strip format center along corridors. So it's considered a little bit less walkable and people just think about it a little bit differently. And so I think that psychological piece is the thing getting your neighbors excited about creating some more diversity in a first ring suburb can be really helpful. But I think as we think about, instead of just saying we want things to be mixed use, which can feel scary, talking with some specificity. What are those businesses, right? It's restaurants and coffee shops and laundromats and dry cleaners and daycares and insurance agents and architecture offices and bookstores and antique stores, right? It's these places that we want to live nearby. It's your wine shop and your brunch spot and your diner. And like you want to think about, not all commercial is the same. A drive-through gas station that is a chain is not the same as a locally owned pizza joint, that's done by a chef that has a line out the door, every Thursday night. And so these are the places that we need to live our lives, and we want them close to the kinds of housing we like at the price point that we need, and in a diverse format with other kinds of housing, so that our friends and our grandparents can also live nearby. And so some of our first ring suburbs were developed with all of this stuff baked in, and some of them have great commercial corridors with locally owned businesses already. Other first ring suburbs we see, have a lot of potential because they don't have these things. And so there's a lot that they need and a lot that we can add as small developers to make these neighborhoods better.
Thanks, Alli. I'm going to pass it over to Monte. So you have worked in some first ring suburbs in the Dallas metro area. Can you talk a little bit about your background in incremental development in this area and what challenges, opportunities you have experienced that might be relevant to Kansas City?
So let's see, in the first ring suburbs, our first ring suburbs were, basically born out of white flight.
Mm-hmm.
And then they deteriorated out of white flight to the next, to the next ring. And so now that opportunities are getting less and less sprawling, we're seeing this movement come back in. The good thing about these first ring suburbs is most of the strip centers are not on the freeway. They're not the gigantic big boxes on the freeway, so they're still surrounded, like the one I'm in right now, one I'm sitting in today, is next to the city hall, surrounded by a real neighborhood across the street from a school and a park, but it's also sitting on a 6-lane road, with sidewalks right up against the outside lane, where you're walking down the sidewalk and there's a mirror of a car, 12 inches from your head coming by. And so the challenge is how do you re-envision these strip centers? So some of the suburbs think, well, we just need to tear them down and build a new strip center. And we can't afford to tear them down. If they come down, they ain't going back up. There's nothing in this market so how do you reuse these? So downsizing roads, I've been involved in several 6-lane to 4-lane downsizes, and we're involved in one right now. Downsizing the road, working with the city, reinventing the shopping centers. The shopping centers were started out as all retail, all consumer, all consumer goods, grocery stores, things to buy. Today, reinventing them to look like Main Street, where only maybe 18 or 20% of the strip centers will be retail. And then you may have government uses and medical uses and co-working and micro restaurants and smaller, occupants. We still have a Dollar General like across the street over here. We still have a laundromat, and they're still part of the neighborhood and connected to the neighborhood. The difference in the incremental developer, who is normally a local trying to fix something, versus the developer from out of town, the big developer coming in. The big developer coming in is going to want to scrape it, build some multifamily of some sort, lease it up, and sell it to the Ohio State Teacher Pension Fund or whoever. So it's got to be a short-term. They're short-term here, so it's got to be more like what I call financial architecture. So they're basically designing it for the finances. But the challenges are still in these first ring suburbs is they're still trying to be like the new suburb south. They're still thinking, so they still haven't learned the lessons. So there's still, one of the, in like Duncanville, one of the cities I work in, we got a Chick-fil-A, and you would have thought we discovered gold. It's like, oh my God, is that our highest goal is a Chick-fil-A, and they don't understand form. They don't understand, the density per acre and how that makes the city, better. And they also say we're built out. We're 11.2 square miles in this city, and there's only 50,000 people here. I promise you, we're not even close to built out. We just have to build different. We don't have any big lots of land to put subdivisions in or any big, plots of land to put a mall, another mall on the freeway. But that's still the way we're thinking. That's still the way we're thinking. And to get that thinking changed is really difficult. And I think it's going to take a few more deaths. Death is not always bad. A few more to get into to a better pattern, a new pattern. So.
Thanks, Monte. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about housing specifically. So Andrew, Sean, you both work in housing development in the Kansas City metro. Andrew, can you share some of your insights from your projects, specifically your urban infill projects, and how they've addressed housing needs in different markets and how that might relate to first-ring suburbs?
Yeah, and it's first ring suburbs is obviously there's lots of different experiences between different cities, but I think in general they're seeing a lot of increase in demand, right? So it's kind of like an exogenous demand where, as Monte was saying, some of that movement out to the further rings is reversed, and people are kind of recognizing some of the nice things that come with being closer into the main metro area or some of the older building patterns that some of the first ring suburbs still have. So the first ring suburbs are having this issue of rising housing prices, right? It's harder to build up or build more thickly than it is to just sprawl out. And if you're a first ring suburb, you can't go any further. But it also attracts developers, right? We're seeing the increase in demand by increasing housing prices and increasing rents. And just by its very nature, new development is going to be at the higher end. It's very expensive. I mean, nobody expects a brand new car to necessarily be cheaper than a used car, and development is not that much different. So it's really working with cities that might feel like they're working from a position of strength, right? They're seeing increasing housing prices, increasing demand, don't necessarily want dramatic change, but also are concerned with things like Alli said of, it's impossible for young people to live here, right? Children of people who live there are moving to other places because there is no room for them. And another thing I guess I would say too, that I think people are starting to realize is that it's not necessarily the people who are incumbents in a city are afraid of more people. They're more afraid of more cars. And so pulling with that issue of declining household sizes, more cars per house is a real challenge. So I wouldn't say that some of the more NIMBY cities are necessarily against people. They're just against what they perceive as the cars that come with them. And they're not necessarily wrong about that. So when we're talking about urban infill, it's often a city that might be looking out ahead and saying, hey, we're really dependent on like one or two maybe commercial entities or businesses for the majority of our tax revenue. And we have all these liabilities in terms of services that need to be provided, roads that need to be maintained, sewer pipes that need to be maintained. And while things are going pretty well, we're kind of reaching that end of life cycle for some of the investments that were made maybe in the 1960s or 70s, and trying to figure out what is that stable tax base that can provide this going forward. We can't rely on a Sprint being headquartered in our community to just pay for everything and keep property taxes low on the residences. So cities are looking for opportunities to increase that tax base, and that often means just more people, more housing, more residents. Monte mentioned the value per acre concept that a lot of people are starting to pay more attention to, and realizing that even more gentle density can actually be really beneficial from a tax perspective. So that's where incremental development comes in. It's kind of trying to work with cities to say, hey, this is not going to radically change your city. This isn't something that should be that scary, but it's going to help you in some ways address some of those longer term concerns that are now just kind of coming to the fore of how do we pay for all these roads and sewers and other parts of our city that have been built out, and we can't expand anymore. We're hemmed in, right? There's another city on the next ring outside, and different housing types and different forms is one of those areas.
Thanks, Andrew. Sean, I want to shift it to you to talk a little bit about home building in Kansas City. I think when people think about home building, they often associate that with kind of larger scale suburban neighborhoods being built kind of all at once to a finished state out on the edges of the city. And you've taken a more incremental approach to housing development. As a home builder in the Kansas City region, how does incremental development fit within the broader residential construction landscape?
First, I'd say there's not that many people doing it
Yeah.
because it's hard. And I would say that we do build in the suburbs, but we still build, I would say 30% of our homes are on infill lots. We have never torn down a home, by the way. So a little background about us. We buy lots. Um, and how do we buy lots from people? I've sat on front porches just drinking coffee to feel like the old farmer that meets people at the coffee shop sometimes, just getting to know people. People get to know us because you got to build trust with some of these communities to go in and even be able to purchase the lots. So how we fit in the big picture is that I would say more current event status is that D.R. Horton, Lennar, Roush Coleman, Hakes Brothers, there's been some more regional and national players that have moved into Kansas City, which is not necessarily that's not a new thing, but they've been here and they've left. And if anybody on the call doesn't know this, that every executive builder 20 NAHB call, whatever we get on, Kansas City is the weirdest market in the nation. And the reason why that is because we have the most builders, I think, per capita. I'm getting into a strange space here, but we don't have the margins that some of these other communities might have because of the number of builders that are here. But kind of tying this back into how we fit in the development in that landscape is that there's a need for it. And I think we all say it a little bit different way, but I believe anybody that's in a first ring suburb or even, the urban spot, let's say that I mentioned earlier, that, I feel like we owe them something kind of thing, right? But when you talk about communities like Blue Springs, Lee Summit, downtown Overland Park, downtown Belton, downtown Grandview, Raytown, all these communities are looking to rebuild themselves from the inside out because they've sprawled out. They're looking at some of this old infrastructure, exactly what you said, Andrew. And I say some of the things that I've seen, that the smartest plans I've seen is we pay attention to the overlay district plans. We pay attention to changes in rules, which include how can we redefine lots from people so that you can build an accessory dwelling unit. I mean, tying that back into the tax base, some of those homes that were built in the 50s, they're 1,700 square foot ranch, but they have 100-foot lot frontage. I mean, I could build a whole nother house, still have wider setbacks than I do in Midtown. And when you have to think about redoing all that infrastructure within the city, I think that's a problem that is going to need to continually be focused on. So I think that really it just comes down to how we feel that we advance these things is that we work with the cities to create a financial incentive for the homeowners. So I'm kind of, probably leading into a future question, but it is difficult because if you're going to build a home right now, let's say an inexpensive home, Monte, it's not the same as here as it is in Texas, okay? But to get an affordable home around here is like $330,000. Well, if you go sit in a meeting in a community in some of these infill areas, the homes are selling for like 175 to 200,000. So as an incremental developer, I have to go in there, have a compelling offer. I have to make sure that I'm in an area that I can see a vision for. You can't just place houses in empty lots. It has to be much more strategic than that. And then work with the community to find a plan that works. One thing that's been very helpful to us is 10-year tax abatements for the homeowners. Helps us offer a financial incentive for people to move closer to their downtowns. And it starts to revitalize. It only takes one big project. We're working on one in Belton right now. It's only 11 lots, and I might as well have developed 30. I might as well have developed 300. The amount of city time and planning that's gone through it. But my hope is, and I'm telling everybody on this call that's maybe in a first ring suburb, is we told the city of Belton, we know it's just an interview period because there's no return on my investment to sit through a year and a half of city planning meetings over 11 lots. But my hope is that with that interview period and what we're doing to revitalize, a small area town right next to downtown, I think that's what ignites future opportunities. And I think it's going to take local builders like ourselves to build that trust of the community, because council members have too much pressure on them from the communities. Kind of tying back into what Monty said, they have too much pressure from people coming in, scraping, building the multifamily, apartment complexes or whatever it shall be, and then leaving. I think it's just tough for them right now. So how do we fit in that landscape? Local, still focus on the social, financial, and construction environment to make sure we get a successful project.
Thanks, Sean. This is a great segue into talking a little bit about barriers and how cities can better support incremental development approaches in their cities. I want to start with you, Andrew. What do you think some of the key barriers to incremental development are in first ring suburbs, and how can local governments and community organizations help to overcome those barriers?
I think a big barrier is kind of what Sean was talking about. It's just the sheer amount of time and, for lack of a better word, bureaucracy that has to be gone through to be able to build in some of these communities. All right. So there's lots of people, I think, who are out there that wouldn't be called a developer, right? That's not how they envision themselves. They're a home creator. They want to do something cool for their neighborhood, who just wash out because you hit 13 brick walls and it's like, I can't keep going. So if there's anything that can be done to just be much more, provide much more certainty to somebody that it's like, if I start down this path to create this great project, even if it's just, small scale, or especially if it's small scale, that they're going to be supported and not fought every step of the way. I go back to a little bit of what I think of as a success story, which is when I did 2 projects in the Crossroads neighborhood of Kansas City. And it was around the time they were putting in the streetcar. But with the streetcar came a whole slew of like, we want you, we're gonna clear away the obstacles. And this is the city saying this, and the city planning department and the mayor and everybody else saying, this is what we want, and we're gonna help make it happen, right? It's tax abatements, temporary tax abatements, it's faster turnaround on plans and so forth, right? So there was kind of a concerted effort of like, we want this, as opposed to where eventually the success kind of turned it around, which is not that we want you, but more like, what are you going to do for us kind of thing. Like we're going to fight you unless you're going to give us something. When really the attitude before had been the other way around. Like we want more people in the downtown core. So it goes a lot to that. I mean, certainty is kind of an overly overused word. But it is like by far the best way to get somebody to say, like, I'm going to commit the time and effort and really the upfront capital to work on a project, knowing that this is something that's going to be approved by the city or welcomed by the city. And that some of the hard work of kind of building that community support has already been done, whether it's, general plan processes or some other effort to say, okay, this is, hey, developing community, housing, creating community, this is what we want. Now come to us.
Mm. So Monte, I want to shift to you. What are some of the key barriers you see, both within the market that you work in, as well as across the country with people that you work with, as in these first ring suburban areas, and how can local governments and community help to support incremental developers?
So yeah, Sean, we have the same housing pricing you talked about. It's funny, across the country, in affluent neighborhoods, you know what the biggest problem is? Affordable housing. You know what the biggest problem is in poor neighborhoods? Affordable housing. It kind of like it's all the same. Everybody thinks we always think we're unique here. And the more I look, the more we're not. But, and the biggest problem here is that city regulation, fire marshal, and just public works and across the board in city staffs, they're not speaking in the same language to each other. So one of the council may approve a zoning, and then they didn't tell the public works, and they didn't tell the different departments to work on, to work together on this. And so they're really working in silos. It's amazing, especially city councils. City councils, they don't get to talk to each other because of open meetings and, walking quorums. So they go to vote, they don't even know what the next guys or gals thinking. And so when I did the shopping center I'm in right now, I've got townhomes on the parking lot, hotel, I've got, bars, tattoo parlors. I mean, I got all these things I got in there. And so I picked the ugliest property in town. I like to go for the ugliest thing you can find, the bloodiest, the highest crime, because this is where people are desperate. And then I like to have a community meeting right up front, Abby, like with city council people, like a group of the top leaders. I say, if I did this, would you support me? And if they say yes, I said, if anybody here tells me no today, I'll go away. This is before I'm, too far down the road. So, and then I get a little bit bigger group of community leaders. I say the same thing. This is what I want to do. Anybody here against me, I will go away. Tell me right now. Tell me today. And then I'll have a town hall meeting where there's 300, like 300 people, and you do the same thing. Here's what I want to do. And everybody's like, at that point, it's so ugly and so bad, they'll do anything. They'll give me anything. They gave me all the zoning that I wanted. Reduction, no parking. They gave me the reduction. They gave me across the board. They let me put storefronts going out the back of the strip center for residential. They gave me all of these things. But then after that, the council changes, the staff changes along the way. The fire marshal comes along. The fire marshal says, a different fire marshal reads the code different, says, no, we want you to fire sprinkle this building. We want you to do this. Well, you didn't tell me that before, and so those things change. They gave me a building permit not too long ago on a space that the zoning didn't fit. They changed the zoning up in the document from the time it went from city council to the turning, but they gave me a permit. I built it out, $300,000-$400,000 worth of build out, and then they wouldn't give me a CO. I had to go back through zoning starting last August, which I just got the zoning last week. It's like a, I don't know, it's like nobody knows what the other person's doing. And I think as a community, what we're doing here is we have these self-made design studios. And in these design studios, what we're doing is saying, these are the pictures we don't want. Here's the pictures we want. All multifamily is not created equal. All boutique hotels are not created equal. There's crappy ones and there's good ones. So how do we get the design? How do we get the picture we want? I've asked them in City Hall. I said, let's put pictures on the wall. Let's put pictures everywhere, what we don't want and what we do want. Let's put them up. And so we can see, because we can't read the comprehensive, we can't read the comprehensive plan. The average person, I can't even read them. I know the average person can't read them. And so, I think it's a communication, and you still have city councils and city staffs that are still wanting to be, and they're still in the 1980s. They're still in the 1980s. They're still thinking we're going to get Bed Bath and Beyond and Victoria's Secret on, and all this, and Chick-fil-A. They're still there. They don't realize the power of, Joe's Pizza Parlor, how legendary, getting legendary occupants, legendary tenants, and also helping them own buildings, helping entrepreneurs own buildings. Because you can get a really good restaurant to move town if you can say, come down here, I'll get you an ownership of a building, not just a renter. I'm just not going to make you a renter. I'm going to make you an owner, a stakeholder here. And I think economic development corporations and cities ought to be focusing more on that, because who's going to come to Duncanville, Texas, or Fayetteville or Kansas City for Outback Steakhouse? If it's there, it's there, but who wants to go there? It's fine, but it's like not legendary. It's not that much fun.
Yeah, thanks, Monte. Alli, I'm gonna pose the same question to you. You obviously have worked with people across the country like Monte and have seen a lot of hurdles that developers are facing, and maybe some solutions that people have taken to approach these barriers. Can you talk a little bit about what you've experienced?
Yeah. I think it's a multi-pronged approach. IncDev tackles regulatory hurdles with communities directly, often via our stress test. So we'll come into communities working as a consultant to the city, Often where a city is saying, we want more of this thing that we're not getting. And then we give them a to-do list of all the regulatory changes, of all of their policies that are making the thing that they're saying they want illegal. And so working directly with cities is a great way for that to happen. But we also then kind of simultaneously coach small developers on how to, frankly, listen, the word I use is infiltrate their own local government. Volunteer for boards, show up for meetings, stack your decision-making committees. It makes an incredible difference to have a grassroots movement of locals who are working together to tackle regulatory challenges. And I think YIMBY Action is a really great kind of national model for the way that a lot of kind of mid-30s and 40s professionals have really started to utilize that civic engagement and civic volunteering in a really impactful way to implement these changes. One of the things about zoning that is a reality is, like, from a technical legal standpoint, one of the things that's really frustrating about zoning reform nationally is, a lot of these things that we're talking about wanting to do is just illegal everywhere. And unless we modify zoning, it's just non-starter on being able to do it. One of the things that is really frustrating is zoning is really local. So we have to fix it in every single little town in America before we start to see big changes. But also, that's the thing that is so powerful about zoning reform is realistically, like, 6 people in your town could legally, I'm not saying politically, but like legally could go vote tomorrow and completely change your zoning code. You could completely change and scrap policies. And often in a lot of communities, those zoning codes and policies that feel like such a hang up feel like set in amber, like they're just not even possible to change. And so I think one of the things that we've done really successfully in Fayetteville is, over like a 15-year period, have very intentionally stacked our city council, have stacked our planning commission. Every one of those little boards that makes a million decisions has people on it who understand what incremental development is, who understands what we're trying to do in the community and why. Like, what is that common language? What is that common goal? How are we all working towards that goal to do so? And it's often, this year we got a new mayor elected. We've had a really popular incumbent mayor for 16 years. And I want to tell you guys, I burned a ton of political capital going up against a very popular incumbent mayor who was no longer managing our town actively enough to, our city departments were just crumbling in terms of lack of direction and management. And that is the thing that small developers really interact with is the permit office being well run? If that crazy fire marshal comes and tries to stop your project to add fire sprinklers halfway through, do you have a mayor who's going to call them and be like, y'all, that's not going to happen. We're not going to do that. And we got our first female mayor elected. She has been in office about 10 days. And so we're really, as a town and as an ecosystem, we're really dedicated to saying there's a group text string, right? That is like, okay, this city council member is coming up for re-election in 2 years. Who's going up against her? We need to start prepping now. We have had people move into different wards so that they can really selectively be on a seat that we really need on our city council. So I was on our planning commission for a number of years. I have also chaired our Construction Board of Appeals for 7 years. The Construction Board of Appeals, also, if you guys are the ones that are going to be doing this, really highly recommend you find the boards that only meet when requested. Hot tip, I've been chairing that board for 7 years and we've gone to like 6 meetings versus Planning Commission, right, which is like 8 hours a week. It was a second job. But the Construction Board of Appeals is the board in our town that exists you can take if you disagree with your building official comes and on site is disagreeing with you about a code interpretation. You can appeal it to the Construction Board of Appeals. And we have state legal, kind of power to overrule their interpretation. We can't overrule building code, but if we can interpret those words in this way, we can overrule them. It only took 6 times of overruling them every single time anyone asked for anything, that they know that if somebody appeals it, we're going to give it to them. They give very different decisions in the field than they did 7 years ago. And it is really useful. We had a building permit that was hung up recently on a commercial project where the building inspector was fighting with us about what the definition of a corridor is. And, and we're down in the weeds, right, with them. And being able to say, I'm happy to appeal this to the Construction Board of Appeals. I can guarantee how they will vote since I am on that board. is really useful. And so there's some of this that like these decisions get made in your town by people who live in your town, and they could be made by you. You just have to show up to the meetings, and you have to have enough people that are working in your ecosystem, working together in your cohort, that you've got a planning commissioner that you can call who lives in your town, who understands what you're trying to do, and say, we're bringing this variance through. I know that this sounds stupid. Here's why we need to do it. Can you support this? Okay, great. Thank you. I think that real active long-term work in communities is really important. And that's been something that's been critical to my success as a small developer. I think financial hurdles are one of our major last focuses right now too. Like I would say my interpretation of, the kind of path of IncDev is that the first couple of years we're figuring out how to build ecosystem small developer alignment and how to train communities at the same time we're training small developers. So we're not just like setting small developers loose on these towns that have no idea what they're trying to do and making these combative relationships. I think relationships in ecosystem was that first 5 years. I think the next couple of years were zoning and advocacy and figuring out how to train people how to do the kind of projects we're talking about in creative ways that did meet code technically creatively. I think financial hurdles have been the big focus for us, the last couple of years. Probably half the developers we train are women or developers of color, and they're often working in historically redlined neighborhoods. And so the math is just different for them. A lot of people we train don't have family money to use as equity on their first projects. And so access to funding is another one of those barriers like zoning that we spend a ton of time working with local lenders to solve for alumni members.
So I want to talk a little bit about the importance of design in incremental development, because when you're building maybe a large master plan project or a subdivision all at once to a finished state, there's a lot more consistency of design palette, of style, architecture, and incremental development is fundamentally, one-off projects, smaller projects that are fitting into an existing context. And so the issue of design comes up a lot in community engagement. Andrew and Sean, I want to pose this question to each of you. How do design choices in incremental development projects influence kind of neighborhood character, livability, and how have your projects kind of fit into that question? I'll start with you, Sean.
Andrew looked really excited there for a second.
I saw he unmuted himself.
Andrew's an architect, so if you wanted, Andrew, how about you correct me on anything I say wrong? How about that? I would say that we have, we've evolved. So when we went into some of the different projects, and we're working on a bunch of fun stuff right now. So we went in with 2 designs. I would tell you that in the designs that I met with, kind of like what Monte said, we met with the neighborhood and showed them the designs through a meeting much like this. And interestingly enough, they were modern designs, so I know that doesn't fit in with the neighborhood, and Andrew's already frustrated with me. But some of them are modern designs, and then we'd also do a traditional design. We also are tying into cars. I think that's how this meeting today, I didn't realize how beneficial it would be to me, is that cars are a big deal. The cars, we have an infill ordinance in KC-Mo where you cannot have street-facing garages. And I'm still waiting for people to tell me why we can't do this, because it's creating a huge problem, because now the lots are so narrow, we're forcing the cars back on the street. And the reality is nobody's going to get rid of their cars. At least I don't believe they are. So some of these ideas that have been manifested from other cities with different infrastructure, maybe they had alleys, is creating somewhat of an issue for us. In fact, to the degree that I might stop building in Midtown because I'm literally testing their infill ordinance right now. And I do have tax credit money that I've been able to obtain from some of these homes. But I'm selling homes now for, this makes 0 cents for $6,000 less it cost me to build it, because I can't get rid of them. They're lifted 18 feet off the curb, they're pushed back because some of these old houses had a bunch of steps. They're in the hills. Just structurally, I could have made a lot more sense out of it by the garages has turned into an issue, the design characteristics. The neighborhood wants to maintain the character, but then the new occupants of the homes or the new residents that want to move back into the city They want a new elevation that they have not seen. They're asking for a different design. So using the word incremental evolution, it's kind of like the neighborhood has evolved in certain areas with this different modern design. I think that we need to still accommodate the safety choices that are available in the suburbs, so to speak. And even like a personal story is that we sold a home. Somebody mentioned this call, but I'm focused on Mannheim, but we have great projects going on in many of these other cities with people on this call. But the girl's name was Tracy. Her family lived down in Mannheim Park. It would have been probably in the late 70s, early 80s. She moved out to Blue Springs to go to school. But she was named Tracy because she lived on Tracy in downtown. And she moved one street away back to Midtown to her original community, but she wanted these new amenities. She wanted a garage. And I think those have been some of the challenges, is that the community wants the character. So we have been able to mold and shape that to a little bit more of what they want. Also, the lot lines are skinny. So these lots, we build on 33-foot wide lots. So if you consider the side yard setbacks, some of our homes are 20 feet wide by 58 feet long. So the constraints of the lot, plus if you're building in between two homes, the amount of work that it takes to do that, you can primarily have to either dingo the backyards, or you have to use kind of like an elevator where they shoot the dirt back there. So it comes with a lot greater expense to build some of these homes in these tight lots down there. So I feel like I hit on a lot of stuff, but the design choices are really influenced by what we believe brings more people to the community and trying to stay within the guidelines. My challenge is some of the guidelines that have changed now are making it more difficult to build and sell these homes.
All right, Andrew.
Well, let me correct a few things. One is I'm not an architect.
Oh, I thought you were. Sorry, Andrew.
That's okay. But everyone might not like this item, but design to me is usually a red herring, and fitting into the community is generally just another way of saying we want only single family homes. So the projects that I've done have all been in what I would call just eclectic neighborhoods already. So this would be like Columbus Park neighborhood in Kansas City, the Wallow neighborhood, the Crossroads, where it'd be really hard for somebody to say like, oh, there's a character of this community, at least when it comes to like design and the building footprint, because they're old enough that there's everything. There's little commercial properties, there's 3-story apartment buildings, there's the occasional 8-story condo building. I mean, it's kind of all over the map. So I don't want to dismiss the importance of design, but I would be generally more of a fan of let people do what they want within like a certain massing and not trying to overly dictate exactly what's going to look at. Because to Sean's point, I mean, taste kind of fluctuates. And as developers, we do want some kind of financial return. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do this. And so a city kind of dictating things that make a development not economical to build, well, then you're not going to get what you say at least you want to. And I think there's a lot of, I mean, cities can be very creative in prohibiting what they don't want, right? They might say, okay, we're open to ADUs, but we're going to put all these restrictions on ADUs that it's like nobody in the right mind would ever build it. But some council member can say, okay, we did our job, we allowed ADUs, and then doesn't care that nothing gets built in the next 2 or 3 years. And in fact, I think my biggest criticism would be, and even Sean brought up Kansas City's infill ordinance. Well, it's been about 2 years. Have they gone back and counted how many projects were submitted under that infill ordinance? I mean, it's probably nearly zero. I mean, Sean, you might be one of the few people who have done it. So are people going back and looking at some of these efforts to see if they actually make a difference or not, right? And the infill ordinance, in part, is my understanding, is trying to do that design. Like, we want things to fit in with kind of what the surroundings are. But a lot of these streets, especially in the older neighborhoods, I mean, there's all kinds of different stuff on that street. So trying to dictate that it looks like the rest of the street in terms of height or setback is futile, because it's like, all right, am I playing off of the triplex across the street, or am I looking at the single family home in the 25 square foot, 25-foot wide lot to my left. So again, not to criticize design, but like I just would really caution electeds and city staff to be like, we need to be very prescriptive when it comes to design. Let people kind of do what they want, and if it works, it works, and if not, then the market will speak to that.
So Alli and Monte, just to follow up on that, do you have any reactions based on the markets that you work in or places that you've worked with, where other developers are, where that line is between too much regulation around design and standards that are necessary?
I'm going to agree and disagree with a little bit of that. And that's probably, as the architect on the panel, we're so design forward, right? There is so much of our work that we do that we could not do. If y'all have heard me speak before, we have a running joke, right? That our brand is that everything is just CAF. Like it's got to be cute AF, or we're not going to be able to get it built. And so we can also get approvals for stuff sometimes because the design is really aligned. And that is where your architect matters. You want an architect who has built stuff themselves and written checks for it, and they know you're putting money into practical proportions and detailing that is achievable and maintainable, but also you're not just throwing money at the problem. I do think that for sure the way the design codes are written absolutely matters. There are design codes that even, as probably the biggest proponent for, it can't be ugly. There is so much development that happens by kind of, people who don't think design forward wise, right? We've all worked in those neighborhoods where you see the project go up and you're like, oh no, the neighbors are going to hate like anything that comes forward for the next year because that is so ugly. And people do generally care more about design than they realize. And so all of us getting to a level of we're making it pretty enough people are excited about it, I think is useful. And the way that code is written is so critical and is done wrong in lots of places. But I do think design and making it cute is a PR tool like anything else. And so, I think getting those codes right is another place that being on your city council, being on your planning commission, being the person that's writing that code is really powerful. Our town has a design code that was written by a volunteer committee of 10 architects and developers in town, both modern and traditional architects, well-respected people that, neighbors like. They like when they do a building in town. They have lots of stuff downtown and in suburbs that people are like, yes, style regardless. We think this stuff is good. They wrote a design code that is based around, not having porch columns that are undersized, not having eave details that are, kind of poor quality. You can't use vinyl siding downtown in our historic cores. It is practical and it is well written, and it's written by people who get it. Who they know what they're asking you to do. They're not just trying to legislate you away from being able to do anything. And so I think even going in and replacing those design codes as a really good solution comes back to the advocacy piece.
Thanks, Alli. Monte, any follow-ups on this
Yeah,
discussion?
I think a little bit of what both Alli and Andrew said here. I think you gotta let people kind of do what they want to do a little bit, get the form right. No garages sticking out, front. I mean, raised porches, whatever those things are that makes the neighborhood have character, but let it go a little modern if you need to, or let it go, traditional, let it kind of flow. Because, developments are like people, some of them are tall, some of them are short, some of them are fat, some of them, some of them are blonde, some of them are dark, and so over time, as a development matures and the landscaping comes in, if the form is good, you're not going to even notice, that stuff. So I think it's more important about scale, like Alli said, the columns, right. And the windows, right. The porches, you get those kind of things right. In Texas, our Texas legislature a couple of years ago passed a law that cities can no longer dictate materials. So if I'm doing a traditional neighborhood development and somebody wants to come along and put in a barn metal building out, they can do it. You can't stop them. Now, but we can, but the city still can decide on setbacks, where the garages go. And I hate garages. I mean, I'm trying to go for all carports because garages just become hoarders, storage, and they just don't work. And, they're always promised as parking spaces, but they never are used as, in most of my neighborhoods, they're never used. But I think we got to let people flow a little bit, over time. And I think that's important. But we gotta have some kind of form so the public infrastructure can connect, down the street as the sidewalk goes. I tried to dictate, no bedrooms on the front of my residential neighborhood where you had to be able to see in the living room and the kitchen to the outside. And you ought to see me try to deal with, KB Homes, who was buying lots from me in one of my developments. They fought me. They got their attorneys after me, in the city. They're not going to do design. They're just not going to do it. And that's another good thing about this incremental developers. We do care about design. We do care about, the context of the neighborhood and what happens. But I think, gosh, we're never going to solve this problem. Again, give me some pictures so people can be educated. We have to dumb it down. I need a picture book. Give me a picture book. No more, heavy reading. So I can tell what we want and what we don't want.
Thanks, Monte. So we have about 20 minutes left. I want to shift to Q&A. If anybody has any questions, I think Anna, I don't know how you want to moderate this. We might have a hand raising function or something that we can use for Q&A.
Yeah, if people want to raise their hands on Zoom, I think that'd be the easiest way.
Okay. Not seeing any questions for the panelists.
And if folks don't want to unmute, feel free to put them in the chat as well, and we can go from there. Oh, Megan's got one, looks like.
Sure. Megan?
Good morning, guys. This was really excellent. So I work at a county government level, and infill in our area is real all over the map. But I think what I'm really wondering about is infrastructure and how you all as developers look at potential city county infrastructure investments as being something that helps you get your project built. And if you have any recommendations for other ways that cities and counties could think about infrastructure as a different kind of partnership or a way to invest in affordable housing.
Can I hop in? And I have a couple thoughts about this one. We do a lot of regional growth strategy work. Infrastructure is, as a public body, your most powerful tool to be strategic about where growth goes. Growth goes where you put infrastructure that people can connect to. And so even more so than zoning, infrastructure really leads that. And one of the things that we have seen, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, is the actual limitation to growth and development in a lot of communities is sewer capacity. And even in a lot of our communities, I'm going to get slightly strong towns nerdy with you guys here for just a second, which is, 50% of our water and sewer, which is one of the most expensive things in a city, which is actually one of your big limitations. We always think about it as streets. It's your sewer lines. It's your water lines. In a downtown core, right? Your lot is probably 25 feet wide, maybe 50 feet wide, maybe you have a double lot, and your front setback is like 10 feet. And so you've got half of 25 linear feet of line and then 10 feet of service line. So in a downtown core, even with really old pipes, there's just not that much pipe per property. 50% of capacity in water sewer systems is I&I. It's infiltrate. I always forget the second one, but it's basically infiltration and leaking. And so we're dumping, and you can test this in your own community. Go and look what is your output of your water production facility? You can ask your city department, how many gallons of water do they sell at the meter? In our communities, it is 50%. 1 gallon of water that we have paid to treat and put into pipes that we runs into the ground for every 1 gallon of water that we sell to a house. In our suburban neighborhoods, right? Now think about this. We've got that 1,700 square foot ranch house. It's on a 100-foot wide lot. Sometimes it's a one-sided street. You've got one house that is that 100 feet of pipe. And then you have a 25-foot setback. So you have 2.5 times the length of pipe required by your town as a service line. So instead of half of 35 linear feet of pipe, you now have sometimes the entirety of 125 feet of pipe leaking in the street, supplying one house. And so as we think about I think the big part of infilling more suburban pattern suburbs is thinking about that Venn diagram, right? That's like low taxes, high services, nice place. You can't have all three. And so the more that we can lean into that tax diffusion power of adding additional density, of reducing setbacks, of narrowing up lots, there's a huge tax impact. And we've also seen a really great limitation intentionally by towns that it's not, they don't have an urban growth boundary, they have a services boundary, because every house does not cost the same amount of money to pump water to get not everything gravity drains into your sewer system. Lift stations cost your town a huge amount of money, and these unfunded liabilities in your infrastructure is often like gonna be devastating the second that you start having to replace those systems. And a lot of these first string suburbs are starting to come up on that date that they're going to have to start replacing amenities, and there is not money to do it. And so we've seen communities that have rate changes of 3x, 4x, 5x of current rates to keep up with deferred maintenance. Bentonville, in our community, just put in they're a town of 40,000 people. They just funded a $95 million sewer plant expansion to be able to continue adding growth. The way that their zoning is set up, you can't put enough units legally in that drainage basin that goes to, they're on a ridge. So half of it goes to one plant, half of it goes to the other. You can't even build enough housing to fulfill that capacity. And those 40,000 people are paying for that bond for that sewer expansion the day it goes online, whether or not they've got new housing that is supplying that capacity. And so I think infrastructure is the thing that towns and leaders have to be leading with in terms of density conversations of like, it doesn't matter if you like the character of your, really low density neighborhood, if you can't pay the bills to keep making the water turn on when you turn the faucet. And so I think leading with how and where can we provide infrastructure? Does our math work? Can we actually make this work is one of the things that we've really leaned on politically to say, it doesn't matter if people like that character if we can't pay for it. And so that is a thing that is not really arguable by most states. And there's a huge legal backing to that. So you have so much power to be able to make good decisions. If you have data, if you are doing research, if you're really thinking about how does that infrastructure coming in really work, and how do we really tell our small developers where we need them to be developing and where we will give them special permissions because it works for this integrated regional growth kind of thought.
Thanks,
I'd like
Alli.
to tie in
Any
that a
other
little bit, if I could. So,
Yeah,
Alli,
please.
you hit right the nail on the head. You said sewer and water as soon as you open your mouth. And your approach is more 30,000-foot view. I'm the boots on the ground guy doing infill on individual lots. I'll take a case in Grandview on 135th Street for those that are on this call from Grandview, is that there's sins from the past that these cities have as well through private community lines because they didn't have the money in the beginning. And no matter how much discovery we do, you can definitely cause a problem there. So ultimately, a city, how can they help would be, you can't really fix some of these sins from the past from the private community lines. So we have processes to help deal with that. But I think something really simple is just making sure we have good communication and access to our public works department tools. I know some cities require the Sunshine Act in order to obtain it. Expedite that information as quickly as possible, not just based upon whatever the process timelines are. And, work with the developer. I can buy a lot. I can spend more money on the sewer than I can on a lot. And I keep using Kansas City MOBA. Grandview cost us, once it was all figured out, I have 2 homes going in side by side on a wide lot. And the sewer cost of that, initially I started out thinking that we were going to spend maybe 30 grand on these. Well, now I'm up to 60 because I had to add quite a bit of line due to the policies that the city had and fix this. I really could have told the homeowner that crossed our property line. So this is a social impact, and we may see differences here, but the home that that was crossing our property, the line that was crossing our property, we didn't see, ended up got cut somewhere. This person needs, from where it was connected to, 75 feet of line fixed to their front door. Well, nobody was occupying the home when this happened. Then they got a tenant in there and they realized there was a problem. Well, for me to tell this, I'm the new community member, is how I feel about it. I'm building the brand new house. I'm the one that screwed up their pipe. So what do? I pay to fix that. And I think some type of support from the city for having more information and quicker access to that information would be helpful, because in that situation, I could have got myself in a lot of trouble with the homeowner, but we were able to avoid it, fix it. I would say it was the city of Grandview, where they were able to expedite a decision within like 2 hours on this so that I could have our plumber go fix their sewer. But the actual process to this was supposed to go through an entire city process to fix it, and it wouldn't have made any sense.
I'd like to add just two things. One is, let's talk about roads for a minute. I've definitely worked with some community groups that are maybe unhappy with the pattern of development along certain arterials. It's like, oh, it's just a bunch of used car lots. Well, it's like, well, have you ever spent time walking down the road next to these lots? It's horrible, right? This is a 4-lane road. It's overbuilt. Maybe it's signed for 30 or 35, but people drive 45 miles an hour on it. It's loud. The sidewalk is narrow. It's like, basically, you're not going to get a different pattern of development along some of these overbuilt roads until the road is fixed. And I've been a little bit encouraged because there have been some what I would call 4-to-3 conversions. And Monte mentioned this earlier, that I think people have sort of seen go in and go, okay, this is not maybe as bad as I thought, when I hear, oh my gosh, we're taking away a lane. But the increase in safety, the lowering of speed has been a real boon for the area in just terms of building wealth, because now it's much more pleasant to be in the space than it was when it was just a drag strip. And I've talked to a lot of city leaders who I would say get it, but it's not really being pushed down to their public works departments and other areas in the way that I would like to see it, right? You still see too many times where they just do a quick resurfacing project with a couple cans of paint. They could totally restripe it in a different and safer way, and it doesn't happen. So it's like, oh, great, we just missed the opportunity to improve this road for another 5 or 6 years. So that's one thing I think when you think about infrastructure, is just like, how does our road design actually enhance wealth versus subtract from it?
Monte, do you have any thoughts about infrastructure that you wanted to add?
Yeah, it's just like a building. If you can't get the rents, you can't build the building. Do not, if you can't pay for these utilities and these roads with economic development that goes with it, you can't do it. You got to do it. You got to make the numbers work. When you planning and economic development and public works, they need to be working together. And so you got to plan with the numbers. We always say making money is the most important thing. Doing good is equal. So like, you got to figure out how to pay for these things as they go. And South Bend, Indiana, they've got a sewer program for those infill lots where they give you $10,000 a lot, to fix your sewer because everything's broke. Here in Texas, everything we got is 50 years old right now. It's all collapsing.
Mm.
And it's all on the private sectors. Generally speaking, it's on the private sectors. It's another one of those things. When you buy a building these days, beware, camera your lines, know what you're getting into, make that a part of your due diligence.
Yeah. I think we might have time for one more question. Ian, I see.
Sorry, I couldn't find the
No
hand
worries.
button. Yeah, no, I find Monte's point really interesting. You made a point about culture shifts. In Prairie Village, we've been struggling with this. We did try to do comprehensive zoning reform after we revised our comprehensive plan, and it basically resulted in us being in the news for 2 years in Kansas City. Um, and we didn't manage to move the needle a ton. We laid out, I laid out a lot of points, and they're in line with what you say. I mean, I've been getting data from staff for a long time, the value of every lot in Prairie Village. You look at the zoning of that lot, the density of that lot, and if you just do the math from a revenue standpoint and infrastructure maintenance standpoint, denser lots generate more revenue per square foot of lot. As you go up the density scale, the dollar per square foot goes up, unsurprisingly. Like, it's the strong towns thesis just pans out. And yet, in the face of all of this, the culture still is very don't change stuff. So we ended up having to make, we were able to get some minor changes in with mixed use possibilities in commercial districts, but our primarily R1 single family residential zoning is untouched. We couldn't get lot size minimums adjusted or anything like this. But we do have languishing properties in the city. We're a well-off inner ring suburb. But we do have languishing properties, old churches that are either abandoned or are fading away relatively quickly. And I've had, there have been developers that have asked about these. I know you have an approach on dealing with the community, getting feedback on things. I'm curious, what kinds of, and I know assurances is sort of a sticky word here from the city, but since we can't really get broad stroke zoning updates done across the board, and you have a specific property, like what kind of assurances would you like to see from leaders and maybe neighborhood members in a city that may be in a fairly hostile state towards rezoning, even though it's very obvious that certain properties need rezoning? Like I know that Alli mentioned some things. I'd just like to hear a little bit more on, say you've got let's say we have an abandoned church, and if you're familiar with it, it's on 75th and Belinder in Prairie Village, and it's an odd lot, and it actually, it's zoned single family, but it's actually multifamily if you count the number of people who hole up in there on occasion. And so like how do we kind of have a conversation with that, like breaking into maybe people who are really skeptical about this stuff? Like what would you suggest? Like what would you do in a situation if you knew a city was sort of cagey about this thing, sort of thing?
Like I like on the comp plans, I have a new word. I have a couple of words I use. I like gentrification is one. That's where the locals get the wealth. I have another one. It's complementation, implementing the comp plan, which is what us incremental developers actually do. I think testing. I think one of the things that I've noticed over the years, I'm always experimenting. I'm the guy that's doing the stuff before anybody else does it. Usually where I'm at. And it's like, see, this is not so scary if you do it this way. Now, I could have done it bad. So here's the bad way. We could have done it this way. And I think that's why one good thing about incrementalism is that you can do it and test things, and it's like, it's not very big. We can test it and it looks good. And I would say other things about, because Alli's probably got something here too to say, but I would say this: don't trust anybody. Don't ever trust anybody with anything. If you don't have it in writing, the city attorney hadn't done it. Don't trust anybody. And that doesn't mean that people are bad, because I really think people are good. I really do believe that. But, things change and politics change and fire marshals change and staffs change, and city managers' average time in a city right now is like 3 years or something like that. And you got a whole new regime shift, and that's happened to me, here so many times. But I think those are, it's just a hard thing. And I mean, the more that the movement, the people can see, that we really take responsibility, even if the city doesn't. I care more about the city, I swear. I care more about the city than they do. I promise you, when I'm building something, I care more about it being good than any of them do. And so I think leading by that example, but I've been doing it for 40 years. And don't have any bankruptcies, any foreclosures, and most of my stuff is really good. And I would say most. It's never perfect, never good enough. Nothing I ever do is ever good enough, ever, never. But even with that, I still get treated bad. I still get treated bad in my own. And where I get treated the worst? In my own hometown. I get treated bad, and then they'll give me an award. Last night they gave me an award. They treat me bad. They do stuff to me. They torture me. And then they give me an award. Figure that. I don't know. It's crazy. They need a good 12-step program. It's why we have the 12 steps of town making with our neighborhood evolution. So that's where it comes from, because we're dysfunctional, and we're all dysfunctional, and especially cities are. Anyway, don't get me going. Alli.
Man, I'm laughing about this because, like, I am with you. I've put some of this in the chat, right? Like, I think to the original question, like how do you get a rezoning done and how do you support that in a town that like may or may not actually be very supportive of it? Leaning on comp plans, leaning on future land use plans, leaning on all of that existing documentation that has been done. Has your city passed we have a housing crisis that was declared within our city by our city council. We have statements, really formally in memos from the city council about how concerned they are about downtown infrastructure. Like the more that you can find that documentation from your city that the thing that you're proposing is positive for your city, it meets your city goals, it's aligned with the comp plan, it's aligned with a future land use plan, and the more that you understand your own state's planning laws, the more that you can lean on like this rezoning this is coming from responding to what our city government has identified as problems, and this is problem solving. Here's what our current taxable value per acre is on this building right now. Here's what it will be when it is completed. Here's how many units will be added. Like it's a lot of this is about the crafting of the story of asking. And I do a lot of rezoning. So part of my business is rezonings. We do that for clients. Everything I've ever developed myself, we have rezoned in town. And I'm also with Monte. Like I am considered, a really good small developer. We have city council members who have called us to be like, hey, can you take over this project? It's going south. Can you come and help them? Like we have a great reputation locally. We've never had a project we lost, right? Like the things that are wrong with our projects are like, the same things Monte's talking about, right? Where you drive by it and you're like, why did the builder do that last minute to the porch railings? That's so shitty. Like that's not what it's supposed to look like. But somebody lives there and we got it done, and it's 90% of the way there. Like don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. But also even I've been building here for 15 years. I have a number of great, well-loved projects. We get awards from our town all the time. And even when I take rezonings through, we will have literally a line out the door of people there to yell about it. And I want to call back to something else Monte said. He said it subtly, so I want to call it back more aggressively, which is, I'll phrase it a little bit differently, but I think this is what he also meant. There is this element of like, we just have to outlive some of these people. Like realistically, there are people that you will never convince anything needs to be different. You will never convince them that anything should be built that is not a single family home on a quarter-acre lot. You will never convince them that anything should ever be different than it is, and they are mad about it. And so there are people that you can convince and you can bring along and you can show data and you can talk about what we're trying to do and you can absolutely coalition build and you can make really positive change. And there are people that you can't. And confusing those two people is going to be like bashing your head against a wall. And so there's some of this too that like you just also have to feel really confident in what you are trying to do, that it is good for your town, that it aligns with your town's goals, and you are working in a place that you can make a difference and that you have a town government that is going to support you. Supporting you means letting you do the work. It doesn't mean not raking you over the coals. Those are different things. They will let you build something. They will give you an award sometimes. And yeah, man, they'll be a huge pain in your neck all the time. And you just have to lean in that that's part of the business. So I put this in the chat, but we also have an internal policy that is die mad about it. Like we'll make a strong effort to coalition build and bring you along. If we can't convince you, cool. Let them is some of that. Like let them be mad. Let them come and yell, have your data together, have a well-organized argument, build something people like. It won't be easy, but it is doable.
So I know we're running a little bit over time, and I appreciate those who have been able to stay on the call. Before we wrap up, Sean, Andrew, do you have any thoughts on Ian's question?
I put it in the chat, but it's I think a lot of it is people do want to just be heard, and there's too many developers who do a really poor job around this. But I mean, I've just found, in my opinion, if you go in and you just sort of hear somebody out and talk through it and be very calm and maybe do it over a number of different times, people usually come around because you develop that trust. So I think it's got to be the same thing with councils, which is, be prepared that people yell at you and be irrational and not make sense and all that kind of stuff. But most part, if you just respectfully say thank you for your feedback, people feel like they've done their part, and then you can go on and actually continue to support those projects. It's the councils where that just turns on a dime, where a developer thinks they've got put in so many hours and time that okay, this is going to be supported, and then the next thing they get yelled at and it's a no vote, that you're just like, Don't have your hand.
I mean, I think I
Okay,
would just add that know
guess that's how
the
it's gonna be.
comprehensive plan, know the overlay district rules, know that because what I find is that the cities don't really know, the council people don't know. They didn't read it, and then if they did read it, they no disrespect to the people on the phone because I know that we're in these meetings together, but sometimes I don't think they're so busy. They read 2 pages before they sat down in the council meeting. So it takes effort, I think, on our part to get our heads together before those meetings and remind people what was the initial plan in the overlay district, what's changed since you created that maybe 10 years ago. And I think that those pages of those books haven't been dusted off. And the reason why is because there's very few people like us that are incremental developers that are focusing on rebuilding these cities from the inside out. So know the rules, know what they were looking for, and then lean on some of that. I would totally agree with that. And I'm still trying to get used to getting yelled at. I'm a pretty passionate person. But I would say that also just if the project's right, just stand behind it. And if it's what their guidelines that they were looking for, I don't think we'll ever make anybody happy. And I think the biggest learning lesson I probably had in this whole call, I didn't know I was going to learn some stuff, is that I think they're worried about the cars. I don't think they're worried about our houses.
I
Well,
would say walk softly and carry a big stick. That means have all that knowledge. All that knowledge that I think Alli or Andrew, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said it. Have all that knowledge, walk very softly because I've made so many enemies over the years and I've learned to basically not, to like walk softly. Also, another really good thing, I created a diner over here where all the city council people eat. And that's how I get my work done. That's how I get my politics done. And the owners of the diner are my friends. They tell me everything that the council people tell them. So be part of your community. Somebody said that earlier, attending zoning and all of that stuff. That's all important.
well, thank you all very much for taking the time this morning. This has been a really great discussion. Anna, I am going to pass it to you to close this out.
I'm actually going to pass it over to Ian. Ian, if you want to
Oh, great.
close this out.
Cool. We're just passing it around.
Yeah.
One thing I want before we totally close out, Alli did mention that, and this is largely for the JOCO people in the meeting, but a lot of cities haven't declared a housing crisis necessarily, but they have written it into their legislative platforms. So if you want to use that, go check it out because Prairie Village definitely has said there's a housing crisis. So anyway, thank you all for coming to today's program. This wraps it up. Save the date and watch for more information coming soon about the registration for our next First Suburbs Coalition meeting. That'll be on Friday, April 18th. Location TBD, but we'll let you know. If you'd like to host a future meeting, get in touch with Anna. And thank you and have a great rest of your nice warm day before it becomes an Arctic hellscape in Kansas City. So, all right, y'all, have a good one. Have a great weekend. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.